Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 74 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I'm really glad to be back behind the mic this week. I actually took the last couple of weeks off between the unrest in the world and not feeling well myself, so I'm very glad to be back today with a brand new discussion with Mary Robinson. We had such a great discussion. Mary is the founder of Imagine, a center for coping with loss, which is in Mountainside and Newark, New Jersey. And she lost her dad when she was just 14 years old, and then she struggled for a lot of years after that, and ended up getting into children's grief work, as she says, to make sure other kids don't lose years of their life to unresolved grief. And Mary was actually honored as a 2019 CNN Top 10 hero for her work in this field. So we talked about lots of great topics. Some of them include, we talked about her journey and her experience with her dad getting cancer and dying when she was 14, and, misunderstanding when her mom told her that it would take a miracle for her dad to come home from the hospital, and some discussion around the importance of really using plain language when talking with kids about illness and death. She talked about some of her struggles starting to skip school, drop out of activities, and really struggling for about a decade before she found a therapist. We talked about how she was doing corporate work and ended up starting volunteering in the children's grief field before ultimately founding Imagine. And we talked all about the programs at Imagine. So for any listeners who are in New Jersey, if you're close to their two locations, I encourage you to check that out. We talked about how grief is different than mourning and why she believes the world is driven by unresolved grief. The myth that time heals all wounds. So many, I think, really important topics. We also got into Father's Day. That's coming up, of course, this weekend, which can be a difficult day for a lot of widowed families, whether the mom in the family died or the dad in the family died. It can be tricky either way, so we talked about that. And of course I asked her about receiving the CNN Top 10 Hero Award from Anderson Cooper, who lost his own dad when he was just 10. So I hope you enjoy my discussion with Mary Robinson. Hey, so before we get to today's guest, I have an exciting announcement. The Widowed Parent Podcast has its very first sponsor. It feels like such a milestone, and I couldn't be happier with this first partner. I think it's such a great fit because so many of my guests on the show have written such interesting books. So I am very happy to say that my listeners can now get a free 30-day trial of audible.com and one free audiobook. All you need to do is go to audibletrial.com/widowedparent. And, I've got a page on my website that lists all the books by guests of the show. So if you just go to jennylisk.com and go to the resources menu, I'm thinking you can probably find something there that would be interesting to listen to while you're walking the dog or doing yard work, which is not my favorite activity, but an audiobook does seem to make it just a bit more enjoyable. So, again, you can get that free audiobook and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/widowedparent. And thank you for supporting the show. Now, on to today's guest. My guest today is Mary Robinson, who is joining us from her office in Mountainside, New Jersey. Mary is a 2019 Top 10 CNN hero for her work with grieving children through the organization that she started, Imagine, a center for coping with loss. So Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jenny. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, I've really been looking forward to talking to you. And before we dive in, because I want to hear all about your story and your journey. And, listeners have heard me say before that I always think it's such a privilege to talk to people who lost a parent at a young age. I think as a widowed parent, it helps me anyway understand some additional perspectives on what my kids might be going through, what might come up for them, and helps me understand their experience a little better. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing your reflections. But first, I want to ask you, I imagine it must have been pretty meaningful to have Anderson Cooper present you with the Top 10 CNN Hero Award. So can you tell us a little bit about that and that whole experience?
Absolutely. It was a joyous experience. First of all, just being there for the weekend with the other heroes, and it was just absolutely joyous and an experience I'll never forget. And then when we were at the event, when they were filming the TV event, you don't know ahead of time who your celebrity is going to be, because each of us get introduced by a celebrity.
Okay.
So to find out that it was Anderson Cooper and to hear him talk about his own experience of loss. His dad died when he was 10, and just how he could relate to our mission here at Imagine. It was, kind of beyond my wildest dreams, because I've always known, I read a book of his back in 2006, so I learned about him and his grief and how he couldn't even say his dad's name for years after his dad died. And also, that a lot of what was driving him was really unresolved grief, like going into war zones. And so I was really blown away by the beautiful job he did introducing me. He wrote the whole introduction himself, and then I got to meet him and talk with him afterwards and backstage. And he said he's very committed to helping Imagine and this field. So that was like a dream come true as well. But yeah, he just the way he spoke and totally gets what we do. It was really powerful. And then aside from Anderson Cooper, which was amazing, was to be able to be at that event and be on TV and have a global spotlight shown on the cause of children's grief, of bereaved children, and that it's a public health issue and that kids need support. To be able to get that message out there was also, really a dream come true. I couldn't have asked for anything better, and so grateful to the person who had nominated me. And it literally was a joyous experience, meeting all the other heroes and hearing their stories. And CNN took amazing care of us. They just, rolled out the red carpet and treated us beautifully. We learned a lot. They provided training for us, the morning after the event on media. And yeah, it was extraordinary.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I think they and other sponsors also provided financial support for your mission too, right?
Yes. So we all received a $10,000 grant from CNN, and all 10 heroes, and then the hero of the year received a $100,000 grant from CNN. But in addition, Subaru provided a matching gift for us if we, up to $50,000 per hero, if we could raise the match. And so, we were able to do that in the days after the event. People were extraordinarily generous. We raised close to $75,000, and then Subaru sent us a check for $50,000.
Wow. And
then, as if that wasn't enough, the day after, we went to, no, not the day after, we came back in February, all of our whole class, all 10 of us, to a training by the Annenberg Foundation out in California, a 3-day training on nonprofit management and effectiveness and fundraising and really how to build and grow your organization. They had exceptional trainers, and then Annenberg ended at the end of the 3 days by telling us all that they were giving us a $10,000 grant.
Wow.
So it's just,
awesome.
Really, really wonderful.
Wow. So that's really amazing. I love that. I would be sure to put a clip to his introduction of you in the show notes, because I think it is really a heartfelt statement, and I can tell that he's really appreciative of the work that you're doing in this space. So that's really terrific.
Yeah, he was, so just gracious to all of us. And I wanted to say something about the award. He was so gracious to all 10 heroes, and I think all of us would say we don't feel like heroes. We're not heroes. It is an award for everyday heroes. And like for myself, I feel like, it's just I've worked hard in this field for over 20 years, but the real heroes are the families that come to imagine, and the parents who get up every day and carry on after one of the worst losses that they've had. They inspire me and keep me going. Also, our incredible volunteers. We're able to serve so many children and families because we have, heroic volunteers who dedicate so many hours to this work and making this resource available. And then lastly, my mom, she was my hero, my role model, like how she carried on after, her best friend died, and she was 44 years old, the love of her life. And she had been a stay-at-home mom and went to work and made my life possible. So looking back, she was truly my hero.
Yeah.
I was definitely not being heroic back then, for sure. That's another story.
Well, let's this is a good segue then. Let's jump back to back way up. So before your dad died, can you just tell us briefly kind of what was life like in normal times?
Sure. I had a wonderful dad, a wonderful mom, and, we were a family of four and, lived in Madison, a kind of a small suburban town, about an hour from New York. My dad was handsome, funny, kind, a real people person. He made me feel always just so loved and special. And, we went from this family of four, we would eat dinner together every night. We would share stories from our day. And, it was just good. It was just, he was a great dad, and it was a really great family. My brother is 15 months older than me, and, we were just a typical suburban family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so then what happened?
Well, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. I was in 8th grade at the time, and we had thought because he had been in a little automobile accident. He was a realtor, and he thought he had kind of whiplash. He thought, something's wrong. My neck hurts, and went to a chiropractor, and then discovered, since nothing was really making him feel better, they discovered he had reticular cell sarcoma. So it's cancer of the lymph nodes and had spread to his bones. So he got very sick, and I actually started skipping school, so in 8th grade. And, years later, when I looked back on that, I could see that was my just reaction. My behavior was an expression of my internal distress and fear, and all these changes in our family. We went from a family of four, sitting around the table every night, to, especially after he died, a family going in our different ways and in our different pain. My dad was sick for a year and a half, and during that time, he was in and out of the hospital. I definitely stepped up as I was asked to do, and helped make dinner and do the laundry, and get home right after school to help my dad get in and out of the bed. It was just very, very different when he got sick. We just became like a different family. Though the love was always there, and but we were all, we were just so scared and worried, and my dad looked different. He was wearing a neck brace that held his, head, kept his head from moving, and he got very bloated from the chemotherapy. He had a hard time walking, so he didn't look like my dad anymore. I mean, he looked like my dad, but definitely, not my cool, handsome dad. Mm-hmm. And that was hard too, like you're a teenager, you're kind of self-centered. And sometimes I was a little embarrassed that my dad, looked that way, and it's painful to remember and think about that, but that's the case.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I said this, but the other thing that happened was, I think I said this, that my mom went back to work. So, she went to work in real estate, when they realized my dad wasn't going to make it, she was like, Jerry, what are we going to do? What am I going to do? Because when he got sick, he had just changed jobs, and so we had no medical insurance, and we were really wiped out financially, which is not unusual in families when, especially when it's the breadwinner that dies. There's a lot of financial distress, but fortunately, we didn't have to move. My mom just, again, extraordinarily resilient, stepped up, went to work in real estate, but then she was gone really 24/7. If you want to succeed in real estate, it's, round the clock, it's weekends. So I would make dinner and have it ready, and then 3 hours later she'd come home and it was all dried up, and so it's just completely different, different life.
I imagine that must have been really disruptive and traumatic, even.
Yeah, she was driven by fear, and really very committed to making our lives possible and not us having to move. But yeah, I would say that it was traumatic. I think I didn't have that word back then, but looking back, I definitely know that my brother and I were traumatized. We didn't really, back then, this was in 1974, we couldn't visit my dad in the hospital room, for example, especially towards the end. I don't know, if there was some rule of 8 kids a certain age. So we would, pull up and sort of wave to him in the window. I actually got around that because I became a candy striper at the hospital. So, worked in the coffee shop and got to deliver flowers. So I was able then to stop by his room, and I would pluck flowers out of other people's bouquets to give to him. But, the other thing was that my parents wanted to protect us. So one of the things my mom said when they realized my dad wasn't going to make it, she had, come home from the hospital and gathered my brother and I in her bedroom and her in my dad's bedroom and said, I just want you to know it's going to take a miracle for Daddy to come home from the hospital. And so we were like, okay, thanks. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, we'll just get that miracle then. I could not take in what she was saying. So I always had the feeling I was never told and that I didn't get to say goodbye. I don't know how one says goodbye to a dying parent, but I wish I had had the chance to sit by his bedside and tell him how much I loved him and would miss him. So that's, one of the things we are adamant about here at Imagine and in all the grief support centers around the country. One of our mantras is tell children the truth. And I know my mom thought she was telling me the truth, but that's why a reason we say use the words dying, dead, not, you have to be really clear and really literal with kids.
The plain language.
Otherwise, they miss the message.
Yeah, the euphemisms that we as a society tend to use around death and dying and illness. Yeah. And thinking, and you were even, 14. Imagine somebody who was 6 or 3 would probably even misunderstood even more. Yeah.
Why it's important, especially with young kids, that, often you have to keep answering the same question over and over, just because of their developmental age. And I know, for really young kids, it's hard for them to understand permanence. So they will hear, okay, Daddy died, and you can even explain what it means when Daddy died, but then they'll say, okay, yep, Daddy died, but is he going to come on vacation with us this summer? So, and I think sometimes parents think, oh my gosh, I'm doing it wrong, or, what's wrong with my kid? And like, nope. And we just have to keep answering their questions. And, children go through all different developmental stages as they grieve. And so the conversation with them will evolve over time and what you can say. And, their brains continue to develop, and then they understand the loss in a whole nother way. So,
Yeah, such an important point. You alluded to the fact earlier that I think you said you weren't a hero as a teenager. Can you tell us more about the struggles that you had after your dad died?
Yeah, so my brother definitely acted out in all kinds of ways, as did I. And so I always say, my brother and I, we weren't bad kids, we were sad kids. In terms of myself, I, quit the track team. I quit the school paper and the student council. My grades went down. I continued to skip school. So looking at his behavior and my behavior, the adults around us, just really saw kids acting out and sort of being bad, I guess you could say. And so one of the things I always say now to adults and to teachers, people in the schools, is you have to look at what's going on behind that behavior. You have to ask, what happened? Because behavior is just information for us. It tells us something, especially when behavior changes. I went from being like a really good student and a really good girl and to really just a different kid. And that was information. So I ended up really isolating myself throughout high school and into my 20s and got quite depressed. So in terms of what my struggles were after my dad died, that was through my teens and into my 20s. And really, what we needed was support. We didn't even have the word grief at the time. We didn't know we were grieving kids. We were just, acting out our internal distress and sadness and loneliness and fear. And would we be able to keep the house? And So the death of a parent is a trauma, but it doesn't have to leave kids traumatized, I guess is the point. So looking back, I was traumatized, and it took me years to get my life back on track. My brother and I always say we lost years of our life to unresolved grief. But it didn't have to be that way. If we had gotten support, if our parent, our mom knew about grieving kids, if anybody in the schools knew about, what kids needed. Years after my dad died, my mom said to me, she said, I must have told the story of your dad's death to Carlin, which was her best friend. She said, in the living room, probably over 100 times. And that's the work of mourning, so she had a chance to mourn. She got to tell her story. And that's a very typical thing. You need to tell it over and over again. You need to have a witness and someone who can listen. And that's when I realized my brother and I never got to tell our story. Nobody asked. I was in my 40s the first time someone said, "Tell me about your dad."
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was definitely a struggle, and that's why I do this work. Many lost years, a lot of other acting out, which I don't typically go into, but I'll just leave it at that. Uh-huh. But the turning point for me, it was that I realized, when I was feeling so depressed and kind of all this acting out behavior, I was like, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. And I think there's something wrong if I wake up every day feeling bad. So I went into therapy. I, actually just called an 800 number and got a local therapist and started going. And
you were in your 20s, or when was this?
Well, I was 24 when I started.
Okay.
And I would say by the time I was 30, I was kind of felt like back on track. I mean, in the meantime, I had, gone to college and graduated. I had a, great job at Prudential. So on the outside, it looked like, oh, she's doing fine. She's doing fine. But on the inside, I was doing terribly. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big believer in therapy and having a witness, having someone to listen and being able to tell your story. And so while I said it wasn't until I was 40 that someone said, "Tell me about your dad," the first appointment with my therapist, she said, "So, tell me about your childhood." And the first thing I said was, "My dad died when I was 14. And then I just burst into tears and I just wept. And so it was like, oh, there's a connection to how I'm feeling.
And this was a decade after he died.
A decade.
Yeah. Well, and I know you mentioned those kids losing years of their life to unresolved grief, and you've said that's one of your motivations for getting now into this work. So can you tell us how did you get involved in children's grief work?
Yeah, sure. was working at Prudential Financial in corporate community relations. I managed their volunteer programs. I did some grant making, placed executives on boards of nonprofits. And this one nonprofit called Rainbows International, had a New Jersey chapter and came to us for a grant. So it came to my employee grant making committee. And as soon as I discovered, oh my gosh, there's children's grief support, I didn't know there was such a thing. So I actually immediately started to volunteer for them. And before I knew it, I was on their board of trustees. They were like, okay, you work for Prudential, we want to join our board. And I just, so I started facilitating support groups and ended up not only joining their board, but then 4 years later, when their executive director retired, they asked if I wanted to take over. So really what happened too is I decided to leave Prudential, leave the corporate world, and work full-time in the nonprofit sector and kind of work for a different bottom line. And, in this opportunity, I felt like I had been given such a gift when I discovered Rainbows. And I remember crying tears of gratitude, driving into work one day that I had discovered this organization and that I got to volunteer for it and help other kids like I had been. So that's, kind of how I first got involved, was volunteering, and then left my job and became the executive director of Rainbows in 2000.
Terrific. Well, and now, but now you have your own center.
Yes.
So how did that come about?
I actually went back to school and got my master's in clinical and applied psychoanalysis, because I knew if I was going to work in the field of children's grief support, I needed, I was a computer programmer. I worked in IT for 9 years.
You and I are kindred spirits, I think, in our past lives.
It's not a bad way to start out your career. It's like I was never afraid of computers, that's for sure. Very comfortable with technology. But, so I became the state chapter director for Rainbows and realized I needed to have a better understanding of child development and family systems. And I'd always been curious about what makes people tick and why we suffer and how we can suffer less. And I would always go around asking all my social worker friends, like, where'd you go to school and how'd you learn that? And I finally asked actually one of my board members at the time, because I was I admired his ability to listen, the way he listened at board meetings, his clinical background and understanding. And he said, go to ACAP, the Academy of Clinical and Applied Psychoanalysis, and you'll get all that and more. So, I went back to school and got my master's degree, and then was invited to come to, I met a gentleman, Dr. Jerry Glasser, who had a family foundation. It was named in memory of his son who died on 9/11 and left behind 2 kids. And I had known him for a while, and he said, would you come to Westfield and open a grief support center? This was a town he had been born and raised in and was very committed to philanthropically. And he said, I want to make sure that no kids in our community have to grieve alone. So he provided the startup funding, and I started Imagine.
That's awesome. Well, good. So let's talk all about Imagine, because for listeners who are in New Jersey, I want to make sure they know about you guys and can access your programs if it's relevant, if they're close enough, all those things. So first of all, where are you located?
Yeah, we have 2 centers. One is in Mountainside and one is in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay. And Mountainside is in North Jersey, right? Oh,
it's in Union County. Kind of northeast, kind of central, maybe more central, north central.
Gotcha. Okay.
Close to New York.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The New York end of New Jersey. Okay, I have relatives in the Philadelphia end of New Jersey. So.
Oh yeah. I used to live in Haddonfield. So.
Gotcha. Okay. So, can you tell me about, who are your programs for? What if somebody, calls you up and says, I would like to come to your program? What do you guys do?
Yeah, the first thing we do when a family calls us is schedule an orientation for them, and they come and have one-on-one, they come and meet with one of our clinical program staff, and basically learn about Imagine, tell their stories. For many families, it may be the first time they're even talking together as a family, which isn't unusual because often the family dynamic is, the children see the parent sad, and so they don't want to make them more sad, so they keep it to themselves. And parents don't want to make their kids more sad, so they go into the bedroom or bathroom to cry. And what happens is nobody ends up talking about it, and everybody's grieving alone. So, they come here, the whole family together, and often, again, it's the first time a parent may hear their child tell of their experience. And I remember doing an orientation for a family where the mom kind of whispered an aside to me and said, well, she doesn't talk about it, referring to her 8-year-old. And we went into the orientation room and plopped down on the floor, me with the little girl, where I had a feelings toss game out, and she immediately started playing. And before I knew it, she looked up at me and she said, I found my dad when he had died in bed, and I touched him, and he felt kind of cool, but I smelled him, and he still kind of smelled like my dad. So her mother had literally never heard her say anything like this.
Wow.
But it's something about coming to a grief support center when you come in and oh, this is a safe place. Here we get to talk about death. Here I get to, have all my feelings and tell my story. Because at home, they were, people were afraid to, talk to kids about it because they think, or even adults afraid to talk to them because they think, I'll just make it more sad. I'll remind them. But they're sad already, and they haven't forgotten the person died.
Right.
So the good thing about the orientations, too, is the staff, we get to role model for parents. Here's how to listen to your child. Here's how to help them share their feelings and tell their story. And it's often done through games and arts and crafts. And during the orientation, they also get to make a leaf for our memory tree in memory of the person who died. And that's an important, so that action is part of mourning. Imagine exists for mourning, for healthy mourning. And that's one of the things we explain in the orientation. We talk about what's the definition of loss, what's the definition of grief, and grief are all the feelings in your body in response to losing someone or something you value or love. But the key to how well we're going to do after a loss is called mourning, and that's why Imagine exists. It's a place to come and mourn your loss with other people who've had a similar loss and to find out you're not alone. So actually getting that leaf and writing down the person's name who died or sharing a memory on that leaf, and then together as a family going out into our, it's called Susan's room, and placing your leaf up on the wall on one of the tree murals. And we have 4 different seasons represented, so sometimes the kids will choose the summer season to place the leaf because the family loved going to the beach together, or they place it in the winter season because Dad's birthday was in December. So they get to have some choice and agency, and also it starts that process of just because your parent died, he's still your parent or she's still your parent. They will be your parent forever. You will always have that relationship. And one way we maintain the relationship is by saying their name and writing it down and keeping them with us right here on the memory tree wall in the same room where we have pizza dinner and our opening circle. So yeah, the orientation is really a wonderful place, and you can really see when people first come in, they look very often sad and gloomy, almost like there's a cloud over them. And by the time they leave Imagine and they've had a tour and seen all the cool kids' rooms and got our undivided attention as they share their story, they leave. You can literally see that they're leaving lighter and brighter. The kids are jumping up and down and laughing and smiling and saying, when can we come back? Can we start tonight?
Wow.
So it really gives, just that orientation alone gives parents a feeling of hope. And I think we may be okay. This place is for us.
We finally found a place that gets us and where we can be with other people that are in similar journeys, and that sense of hope. Yeah. Okay. So after the orientation, go ahead.
I just want to say, when they put their leaf on the tree, then they see all the other leaves. One little boy, when he put up the leaf in memory of his daddy, he had written daddy on it. And he had just happened to put it up right next to some other leaves that had daddy. And he was like, there's a daddy and there's a daddy. And they immediately get, I'm not alone.
Right.
We also do an opening circle in that room on all of our nights of support where we pass a talking stick. There's about 60 people on each night of support. And again, from age 3 to 18 and young adults up to 30 and parents. So the kids see as we pass the talking stick, wow, everybody here has had someone who died. Everybody has had a loss. I'm not alone. So that also helps to normalize it. So you don't feel like I'm the only one.
Which so
which is really
often they
helpful.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
In school, they may be the only kid they know in their situation. Yeah. So you mentioned pizza nights and opening circles. And so is this then a weekly or a monthly or how do the groups work?
Yes. So it's every other week. Families come to Imagine every other week for an hour and a half, plus the supper time, the pizza supper. And they meet in small groups of no more than 10 children or adults. It's all based on developmental age. So, for example, 3 to 5-year-olds would be together with other 3 to 5-year-olds, and teens are with other teens. And then during that time there, they get to, do some talking. The older kids, the teens, and the parents spend most of their time talking. The younger kids spend their time doing a mixture of talking but also play, because it's through their play that they make sense of their loss and integrate it into their lives. It's how they grow and develop. Play is children's work. It's essential for their well-being, and it's how they use their imagination and solve problems. And so, the kids play. And a lot of times if people are, sometimes the parents initially are like, wait, what? They're just playing? They were thinking, oh, they'll sit in a circle and talk too. I'm like, but that's not how children grieve or how they, do life, basically.
Yeah.
Especially the younger ones. They don't have the words yet. So if you look in their rooms, there's just tons of, arts and crafts and games, and room to play and climb. And, there's always an activity designed to help them tell their story, share their memories, develop some coping skills, but they can do it or not do it. We follow the lead of the children, so they really show us where they need to go and what they need to talk about. We never say, okay, tonight we're all going to talk about the funeral, or we're all going to talk about guilt, or we basically have an activity. We do an opening circle in the smaller group rooms, and then we follow their lead, and kids know what to do. So,
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really wonderful. I hope that any families that are near enough to you to participate will go to your website and give you guys a call. I forgot to ask, is there any kind of cost to participate in these programs?
No, our programs are completely free.
Wonderful.
We don't want to have any barriers to attending, so they're free, and that's also why we provide supper. Since they're held at night, we want to make it as easy as possible for families to kind of transition from their day and get to Imagine and relax and have some supper and catch their breath before going into their groups.
Yeah, terrific. Good. One thing I noticed when I was looking somewhere, you guys have an elephant somewhere in every room, in the decor or in the furniture or something. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we have these beautiful elephant murals in our hallways, and every single room has an elephant somewhere. Even in our memory tree murals, there's an elephant tucked in somewhere that the kids love to search for. And that's because at Imagine, we talk about the elephant in the room, out there in the world. And in our society, often it's the one thing not talked about is grief and loss, and people end up feeling even more isolated. And part of it is just, if you haven't had any, training, or you don't know what to say, and you get scared of grieving people. You don't want to make it worse. You don't want to say the wrong thing. So many times families have shared, I was in the grocery store and this person I know turned the other way and went the opposite way down the aisle. And it's really just, and that's why we do a lot of our educational workshops is, what do you say and how do you be with a grieving child or a grieving adult? We're trying to really normalize grief and death and dying in our society because, as a society, we're really afraid of it. And yet, everybody's walking around with something that they're carrying, some wound, some loss. whether how recent or long ago. We're all grieving, and but nobody teaches us how to lose. We're very good in school. We're good at teaching kids how to win and succeed, and everybody gets a trophy. But loss is part of life, and unfortunately, we haven't done a good job of teaching anyone, much less children, how do you lose? What do you do when you lose? What do you do with all those feelings? So, yeah.
So something you just said reminds me of something I heard you say in probably one of your CNN remarks. So now I'm just totally going to jump topics here, so apologize to the listeners. But you said something like, I believe the world is driven by unresolved grief. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I say I believe the world is driven by unresolved grief, whether, you're talking about our world leaders or you or me. And walk into any 12-step meeting, any therapist's office, any psychiatric unit in any hospital, walk into any prison, and you'll hear nothing but stories of grief and loss. So I really believe that because we don't teach how to lose and what do you do with all your feelings, those feelings turn into, in many cases, substance abuse or depression or other at-risk behaviors. And nobody knows. Nobody knows they're walking around grieving, which is also why we want to shine a light on, this human, phenomena that everybody has, but nobody knows what to do with those feelings. So, you end up acting out and getting in trouble, joining gangs, ending up in prison, or you end up abusing, drinking or drugs or, all the other things we do to self-medicate. So, yeah, I believe, because we're not given a place or a way to mourn those losses and get those feelings out and discharge all that kinetic energy in our bodies and to heal, it manifests itself even in mental illness. So, and loss, when I say the world is driven by unresolved grief, I don't mean just loss due to a death. I mean, all the things we lose in life. We lose our innocence. We lose hope. We lose our dreams. We lose our best friend. We get our child gets diagnosed with autism or a disability, and that's a loss for a family. We may have parents who are absent parents. They didn't die, but maybe they have addiction. So that's the loss of a healthy, safe childhood. The losses just go on and on. Relationships ending, best friend moving away. And so the thing is, it's like we have to, shine a light on loss. It's part of life. Now, that's why we say, the most important thing is to teach children how to lose. Because it's going to go on forever. Mm-hmm. Just like right now, we're all, we've lost our normal structure to our days, our purpose. If we had a job and now don't, we've lost people we love to the illness and we can't be with them. We've lost the ability to go to graduation or prom, and not by any means to compare that with having someone die, but, it's all kinds of loss, and especially for young people who have no experience with that, they don't know what to do with this jumble of emotion inside of them. So, yeah.
Well, this is also reminded me of something else I heard you say. You talked about this, sometimes you hear this concept of time heals all wounds. And I think you have mentioned you have some thoughts on that saying. Yes.
Well, that's one of the myths in our society. And, we do tours of our center like 3 times a month. And that's, on the tours, we try to dispel some of these common myths, time heals all wounds being one of them. And, it's not the time itself, it's what you do with the time. And we use this example, like if you have, you break your arm, but you don't put it in a cast, over time, your arm will heal, but, the bone will somehow knit back together, but it won't heal right or well. But so when you put it in a cast, then you have the chance of it, healing and repairing well. And I think of, grief support centers like Imagine, grief support groups, as sort of the cast that we put that loss in, so that it has an environment in which it can heal. So, I think it's not just time passing. I had a family come here to Imagine 10 years after the dad had died. The mother and the son were both extremely depressed. And one of the things we do in our orientation is we do that education. What is loss? What is grief? What is mourning? And she said, I get it now. I've never grieved. And we said, no, you've been grieving for 10 years. You haven't mourned. Now is the time to mourn. Now is the time for that work. And mourning looks like a lot of things, but the main thing it looks like, especially for adults, is telling your story, is saying the words out loud. It can also look like journaling and, lots of other things, but the main thing is talk. You have to tell your story, you have to say your feelings, and you have to do it into a space that welcomes it and accepts it and doesn't tell you should be feeling or thinking anything different, but just accepts your story. And like I said, my mom got to tell her story over 100 times, literally, to her friend Carlin. And that's how she worked through it, and that's how she finally came to believe it's real, and he's not coming back. And, she had to work through everything, the trauma of taking care of a dying husband. You can't just walk away from that and just think you're going to be able to move on and let some time pass and everything will be okay. You have to do the work of mourning.
Well, and you mentioned
time alone doesn't heal.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point to keep in mind. And I think the reason why organizations such as yours are so important and so helpful in providing that type of support, some kind of vehicle, some kind of tools, some kind of a way for people to, the parents, the kids of all ages, to find that kind of support. And I think I saw you don't have a time limit, right? So if someone died last month or last year, or like you said, 10 years ago, it's still there. It's welcome and appropriate for them to come in if they're okay.
No matter how long it's been, they can come, they can stay for as long as they want. There's no time limit to our program. And one of the reasons, I think that's a very unique thing about Imagine and other grief support centers, many of them, is because, children re-grieve their loss during different stages of development. And because it's not like, okay, 10 weeks, you came to your grief support group for 10 weeks, now you're done. In some cases, it may be 10 weeks. We find, the average length of stay here is 18 months, but some families stay for years. Some families stay, and then they leave, and then they come back. A little boy who started here when he was 5, and he stayed until he was, I think it was 8 or 9, left, was ready to move on, and other things were starting to be more important than getting to Imagine. But then he came back at 11 because he was missing his mom in a whole nother way. He had grown emotionally and cognitively and, psychologically. And it kind of, I think it re-hits you at different times. They're never coming back. And I wish my mom were here because, I'm starting to think, there's a life transition or moving into a new school and you miss your parents in a whole nother way. It's, the fact that families can stay as long as they want, and there's no time limit, like, it's been 5 years since your death, you can't come. No, it's
right.
You can come anytime.
Yeah, terrific. Before we run out of time, I do want to talk about Father's Day a little bit, because that is actually right around the corner here. So I guess let me ask, did you guys do anything special in your family to celebrate or acknowledge Father's Day, or how did that go for you in those first years?
It's interesting. I have no recollection of Father's Day after my dad died. And I think I attribute that to my mom being, literally it felt like 24/7, just working, scared to death and trying to pay the bills. And I'm not sure it occurred to her, Father's Day, we should probably do something. And not give her credit. Maybe she did. I just have no memory of it. So have to say, too, when Father's Day comes around every year, so ever since my dad died, it's never been for me a tough day. It's never been like, oh, I don't have a dad and I miss him and I'm sad, because that can be any day of the year. I miss him all the time, not just on Father's Day. But, depending on your tradition, for some families that day or Mother's Day can be really, really difficult. So we always say make some plans in advance. And it can often be difficult. So if the dad died, Father's Day can be really difficult for the mom, because, she was reminded that, the parent of her kids isn't there, and that it's all on her now to make the day special without him there. Now what do we do? Or, so we just say, talk with your kids, come up with a plan, think of some things you can do together. And, do we want to do something about Dad or for Dad today? He liked planting gardens or trees. Do we want to do some planting? Do we want to go to a baseball game? How do we continue that bond with him and keep him in our hearts and in our minds on this special day? Or do we want to just go and do something completely different, not related to Dad? The important thing is to talk about it together as a family and decide together and give your kids choices.
Well, I was going to ask about that, because I was thinking some parents might be wondering, well, I think we should do X, Y, or Z to recognize Dad, but the kids are really pushing back. They don't want to do anything, or they don't want to do those things, or they don't want to do something together, and maybe wondering, like, how hard do they push, or how much do they insist versus, letting the kids decide or have input? Yeah,
that's a tough one. Because you may think, and you may even know, like, this would be the best thing, and they'll thank me later, that we did something. So that's why I think it is important, though, to give choices and give kids a sense of control, and because they really lose that sense of control if they have a parent or brother or sister die. But, try to have it be a decision everybody makes together and try not to force it. When they're ready to do something, it may be this year, nope, not ready, don't want to do anything, don't want to even acknowledge Dad. And that doesn't mean you can't. That doesn't mean you can't say, I'm going to put on Dad's favorite song. I'm going to play his favorite album. And you don't have to listen, but I'm going to do it for me. But again, always just talk together as a family and decide. And there's no right or wrong answer.
Well, and then, of course, if you have more than one kid, you might very well have more than one set of needs or interests or desires or whatever. So is it okay then, like, if one kid wants to go to the cemetery and the other doesn't, or one kid wants to do X and one kid wants to do Y? Like, is that okay, or does it have to be like an all or nothing kind of thing?
Well, I think if you can work it out, and depending on the ages of the kids, try to honor each one's choice. Some just may not be possible, and you can say, well, let's do that next year, or let's do that tomorrow, or the day before. You could say, oh, sounds like we have 3 different activities. How get them involved in problem solving. What should we do? Can we do all of them? Should we do one of them today, one of them tomorrow? And then they'll start to problem solve and think and be part of the solution.
I see. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Thank you. I was thinking, maybe as we start to move towards wrapping up, what are some of the messages that you think grieving kids need to hear from the adults around them?
Oh, yeah. I'm here for you. And be there for them. I always say knock on the door of their heart, even when they just say, nope, I'm fine. I have to keep knocking and checking in. And so they really get it that you're there and that your loss matters to them. Let them have all their feelings. So when they tell you what they're feeling, like one example is a little boy once said to his mom, I hate my sister. And she was like, no, you don't hate your sister. And so no, we say, nope, let him have that feeling and get him to tell you more about it. So yeah, I think, the thing with grieving kids is to give them media to express themselves if they're little, like put out some clay and paint and crayons, give them a journal if they're old enough to be writing or even drawing in their journal. I think that I really believe it's really important to get them to tell you what their ideas are. You know, like to say, you can say, it'll get better, it'll be better. I'd rather say, you know, what can we do? What can we do to remember mom, to remember dad? You know, what should we do today? And I see you're sad today. Mom gets sad too sometimes. So kind of let them be where they're at. Let them have their feelings. And then they'll learn like, oh, feelings don't kill you. They just change like the weather. You know, like if you're allowed to have your feelings and talk about your feelings, whether in a journal or on a, with crayons and paper or with your words. And that's where parents can help too, is saying, I'm feeling a little sad today, or I'm feeling, and then because you become a role model for talking about feelings and you give them language for maybe what they can't put into words. So I don't think it's so much about what adults can say to grieving kids. It's really how you be with grieving kids. And, you know, they'll teach you what they need, you know, follow their lead. Sometimes they may need a hug. Sometimes they may need an explanation depending on their age. But they may ask you for that same explanation the next day and the day after that. And that's, you know, perfectly normal and okay too. But just give them your time and your presence and your optimism that we're all going to get through this. You know, I think that's one of the jobs of adults is like, you know, we're going to be okay. I have faith, and I'm here, and we're going to get through this together, and I'm going to take care of you. But it's really more about listening and responding to what they're curious about or what they're wondering about.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that's just a great place to end. So my guest today is Mary Robinson, 2019 Top 10 CNN hero and founder of Imagine, a center for coping with loss, which is in Mountainside and Newark, New Jersey. So Mary, where can listeners find you and find Imagine if they'd like to learn more about your work and connect with your programs?
Sure. Well, our website is ImagineNJ, like New Jersey, imaginenj.org. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram as Imagine NJ. And our phone number is 908-264-3100. They can also send me an email, mary@imaginenj.org.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Mary, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I appreciate the work you do.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Mary Robinson as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 74. And today, a great big shout out to my listeners in North Dakota. I've been watching the stats for a while now, and there have been listeners in 49 states and the District of Columbia and 53 countries, but for some reason, nobody has been listening in North Dakota. So I was pleasantly surprised to take a look at the stats last night, and I saw that somebody's listening in North Dakota now. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here, and please do reach out if there's any local resources there that you think I should know about that I can help spread the word to other potential listeners. As far as a writing update, so you may know I've been working on a memoir based on the Caring Bridge journal, online journal that I kept during the time my husband was sick. I have the first draft done, and I have been working on revisions, and I've actually paused that temporarily. I'm reading a very interesting book called The Anatomy of Story by John Truby, Truby, and it's like 450 pages long. I think I'm about 300 pages in, but it's helping me a lot to understand how some of the big picture elements, structuring the story, thinking about the theme, thinking about how how things shift through the course of the book. Because what I really don't want to do is just write a book that's like, okay, it starts and then this happens, the end. Because I think that would be kind of boring. So I'm trying to learn everything I can to really make it interesting and worthwhile. So that's where I am with that. I do want to, a quick reminder that if you're interested in trying out Audible and getting a free audio book, you can go to audibletrial.com/widowedparent and get a free 30-day trial and a free book. And I do get a small commission, so it's a great way to support the podcast by trying that out. And of course, there's no extra cost to you. Like I said, to get a free book, and actually you can cancel it if you don't want to go beyond the 30 days. So give it a try. I like listening to audiobooks when I go walking, when I do yard work. I really don't like doing yard work. So listening to audiobooks seems to help out a little bit. Okay, I think that's all for this week. Very glad to be back behind the mic, and thank you as always for listening. And until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.